from the EWTN radio and television studios, this is EWTN Theology Roundtable, a conversation with the experts of EWTN's Department of Theology. Got questions about the liturgy, scripture, or tradition? They have the answers. Now, EWTN Theology Roundtable.
We're so happy that you are joining us here from Radio Studio 1 in Birmingham, Alabama at the EWTN Global Headquarters. We welcome you to EWTN Theology Roundtable. Elena Rodriguez here, sitting in with our panelists and our host, Colin Donovan, who is the Vice President of the Department of Theology here at EWTN, and our guests today, who is an advisor for theology, and also our EWTN Counsel, John Manos. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here. It's going to be a wonderful show talking about religious liberty. And so we have the experts here. We want to get your questions and concerns about the risks for religious liberty here in the United States. The lines are open. Our call screener, Matt Gavinsky, is ready to take your calls. 1-800-585-9396. That number again, 800-585-9396. For our callers outside the United States or Canada, we have a number for you too. That number is 1-205-271-2985. Maybe you can share about what's going on in your country regarding religious liberty. And now we turn it over to our host, Colin Donovan. Religious liberty at stake here in the United States. What do you say?
Well, it's certainly under attack, and I think we've seen this over decades now. We go back to court decisions which removed prayer from school and allowed in different places school officials to send children to get medical, including abortion, without the permission of their parents. But we've seen particularly, I think, in the last 6-8 years or so, we've seen an increasing attention to what would seem to be a determined effort at religious freedom. And specifically, and we will discuss this idea that, well, freedom of religion or the free exercise of religion, which our First Amendment talks about, tends to get narrowed in a lot of discussions and even in the terminology that is used to the private practice of religion, to the beliefs that one holds, to the conduct that one does in an actual church facility, but doesn't then have much reach or much freedom outside of that, where there's an expectation of conforming what can only be described as to a secular ethic, to an ethic that is reduced of all religious value, all natural law value. So I think this is what we've seen, and we've seen not just this from the legal front, but also the secularization of culture through the media, through the way students are being taught in colleges, and now increasingly in high school and even in grade school, where again the parental rights and parental views of morality and the way culture should be organized are neglected, and what is taught as a secular ethic, a secular view of all of these issues. So there have been a number of things especially in our recent days, Cindy, that sort of manifest and exemplify this attack. Could you give sort of an overview of that?
Yeah, as you've noted, it is certainly unprecedented. And let's start first with what our federal government has been doing. You know, there's no doubt that there is the federal government's blatant and aggressive role in attacking religious freedom. For instance, we have the HHS mandate, the repeal of the military's don't ask, don't tell policy, with no religious exemptions, resulting in persecution for military chaplains and service members. There have also been executive orders by this president in regard to hiring and contracting contractors. There have also been recent efforts in favor of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which could be used to interfere with the right of religious employers to choose their employees. Secondly, there's been the aggressive and vehement hostility to religious freedom among opinion leaders in media and academia. Some have even gone so far in being very open in maintaining freedom is an unnecessary right. And as you noted, there's been an increasing use in the narrow terms of, quote, freedom of belief and, quote, freedom of worship in the current administration rather than the First Amendment's free exercise of religion. Fourthly, there have been many state and local jurisdictions who have adopted a restricted view of religious freedom, presuming that they have the right to substitute a secular view, worldview that is, an ethic in the minds of children for the religious views and ethics of their parents. Now, having said all this, it's very important to note that the religious freedom defended by the First Amendment is also defended by the Church. We have the Second Vatican Council's Declaration on Religious Freedom, Dignitatis Humanae, which covers all of this. But I think the important part in this document is Article 2. And I'm going to go in and read it because it's important that our listening and viewing audience knows what it is that it teaches. It says, "This Vatican Council declares that the human person has a right to religious freedom. This freedom means that all men are to be immune from coercion on the part of individuals or of social groups, and of any human in such a way that no one is to be forced to act in a manner contrary to his own beliefs, whether privately or publicly, whether alone or in association with others, within due limits." Now, what are points that are made in this document? First, men and women are not to be forced to act contrary to their religious beliefs. Secondly, this religious freedom from coercion is operative only within due limits. Its limitations: this right is not to be impeded, provided that the just public order be observed. Its due limits are reason, natural law, including the obligation of all consciences to the truth. That is, it is objective. It's not purely subjective.
Yeah, and this is certainly something that's not understood, that often by Catholics as well as non-Catholics, because there is a sense that religious freedom means that, well, in every religion, Satanism is a religion, Wicca is a religion. Certainly this is not the kind of thing that the Vatican Council was saying, because elements are the natural law, and tolerate dogmatic differences among religious groups as people journey towards the truth, to which they do have an obligation. The truth is quite another thing to accept as true things which are contrary to the natural, and to make the state, as it were, supportive of that. And I think that's why so many of the founding fathers, John, in their discussing this relationship of church and state, talk about this aspect of the that the religious values of the people, speaking in terms of Christian, or at least Judeo-Christian values, the Ten Commandments, the Sermon on the Mount, and so on, that these Judeo-Christian values are the proper ambit in which democracy can flourish, and that if those values are not found in the people, then our republican government, our form of government, would certainly be doomed to fail, and we seem to be seeing that. Specifically, I think our audience would want to know HHS mandates, and that's something that EWTN has. You've been involved with Beckett Fund and as representing us on these court cases. Where does that stand at the moment?
Well, given the litigation history, recall that we started off in a federal trial court, had been dismissed. We came back to a federal trial court after the government had made what they called an accommodation, which really didn't change anything. And just to frame it up, let's remember that the government is asking EWTN to supply the things that would potentially abort babies in the womb, provide contraception, voluntary sterilization, which is allowing others to mutilate their body to become sterile. All of these are things that we believe would make EWTN act contrary and sinful and would offend God. So the government has told us, don't worry about that. It's between the people you insure in that and their God. And you just give it to them. Well, we can't do that. So we had sued. The original trial court said, no, you have to do this. When we came back to trial court again, we went up to the 11th Circuit of Appeals. There we received an injunction, so the government can't force us.
Now, the 11th Circuit is Eastern United States, headquartered in Atlanta.
Atlanta, right.
Covering this part of the country.
For the most part, just think Alabama, Georgia, Florida, pretty much, the Southeast. On appeal, we'd received a temporary injunction. It said the government can't impose this on us for now while the case is still being held out on appeal. Last February, we had our oral argument. Oral arguments led us to the point where we made our case against the government, and the government made theirs, and now we're waiting for a written opinion from the 11th Circuit. Once that comes, the court's not under any strict time schedule to give that to us, but it could come out any time now. We're in the right frame of time.
It seemed like they were waiting for the Supreme Court to decide, and basically the Supreme Court sent cases like the Little Sisters of the Poor back to lower courts to try to resolve those, so it didn't really...
Well, in their case, didn't go well.
Yeah.
And the Little Sisters just last week said they're going to go right back to the Supreme Court.
So they are, so we'll see how that turns out. Well, we want to dig into this a little bit more, but I think we want to also take a break, so we'll do that, and we'll be back with some more questions for our General Counsel, John Manos, in a moment.
That is correct, and so more to come. Also, we'll talk about a hot-button issue, same-sex marriage, and the courts. It's all coming up here on EWTN Theology Roundtable. You can call in with your questions, 1-800-585-9396. That number again, 1-800-585-9396. Stay tuned.
Next time on Life on the Rock, Nathan Maurer from the Culture Project discusses the organization's mission to help restore all human persons. Discover how they're working towards this goal when their members join Father Mark and Doug Barry on the next Life on the Rock. Join us for the Daily Mass, celebrated each day here on EWTN.
60 Seconds with Mother Angelica.
The Eucharist is the one presence of Jesus that's real. It is the presence of God. He promised to leave. I will not leave you orphans. There is no comparison between the other presences of God. The presence of God is in His Word. The presence of God is in me and you, or you would dissolve into nothingness. The presence of God is in creation, in the air we breathe. But when that priest says, this is my body, and this is my blood, that is the real presence of God. Body, blood, soul, and divinity. It is Jesus Himself, alive.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
Welcome back to EWTN on EWTN Radio and Television. Join our conversation with your question or comment. Call us toll-free, 1-800-585-9396. Outside the United States and Canada, call 1-205-271-2985 or send us an email, etr@ewtn.com.
A lot more coming up here on EWTN Theology Roundtable with Colin, Donovan, Cindy Cuellar, and John Manos, talking about the courts and religious liberty in light of the recent federal court cases. And there is a lot more coming up. We have our lines also building up, so this is a time to call if you want to get into the show. 1-800-585-9396. That number again is 1-800-585-9396 for our international listeners. 1-205-271-2985. And Colin, a lot more to do with the courts. It's not over yet.
It's really true. The first going to bat by what you can only describe and as the enemies of of faith, the enemies of religious practice in our long Judeo-Christian history, morality, and so on, was the HHS mandate to drag us back to where the Roman Empire, with euthanizing babies upon birth, or in this case, up until their head is out of the birth canal. Not much difference there territorially, but there are other areas too. And of course, when we started the HHS lawsuit, we didn't have to have yet the concern regarding same-sex marriage, which now the Supreme Court has said is a right everywhere in the country, a civil right. And of course, this not only has implications for individuals, but also for nonprofits and charitable institutions. How is that decision apt to affect personal freedom and also the freedom of entities like the church?
That's a good question, and we have to remember, you brought it up earlier. The Founding Fathers spoke of inalienable rights, rights bestowed by the Creator. There's a reference there that what's right and wrong, the objectivity, is something outside of the subjective reference. But when we look at the same-sex marriage, you even see it in the way the country responded to it. You saw the tagline, "Love wins." Everybody was talking about love wins. At the top of the commandments, we see it in the Gospels when our Lord asked the lawyer, "What's the sum of the law?" And he says to love God with your whole heart, your whole mind, and your whole soul first. Then your neighbor as you do. So on this side of it, we see the Supreme Court saying, well, it's whatever you want. Now what this creates is, on the back end of it, it sounds like they're granting a right. But when others don't believe, this is the tyranny of relativism that's discussed in so many places. We give reference to what God said. From the beginning, it's man and woman. Now what you're seeing is, if you say that you believe it, go right back to the CEO of Mozilla Foundation a couple years ago who said that, and his board removed him. More importantly, it was never in a court, but people believe they're now empowered to deliver these decisions on behalf of the courts, trial by media, so to speak, where the reaction to his removal, people gleefully joy and happy that, and I saw comments in the public that were pretty big in the general populace that, well, what you say has consequences, and he should live by the consequences of what he said. Well, what he said was true, according to God, that man and woman, but he lost his job over it. So these things, the court has an interplay. The law works in society in ways that aren't directly apparent. Nobody took him to court to remove him.
Right.
But society reacted to what the courts, or what they felt the courts were doing, where they thought the law was, to create a situation where this man could no longer speak his mind, and he lost his job because he spoke what he thought was truth.
That's probably why it's called the court of public opinion. That because if the public opinion is arrayed against values,
Yes.
against the life of the unborn, against natural marriage, against, you could go down, and even against religious liberty, that you have a right to teach. And we've seen this in so many countries, even countries close to home like Canada, where people have been punished for public statements that were considered intolerant of homosexuals when they simply spoke what is the religious truth, the biblical truth, the Catholic truth, or if they're evangelical, the truth that evangelicals believe about the nature of marriage. And so the court of public opinion, there are more officers of the court around than there are officers of the court of the Supreme Court or the state Supreme Court.
It's true. It's true.
So it's actually a worse court in many ways. It sort of clamps down and suffocates freedom, even though the law in many cases doesn't require it.
When it's even worse, because at least in a court of law, two sides get to give each side of the story. In the media, you get one side of the story. And the court of public opinion, there's summary judgment immediately after one side of the story.
And summary execution as well.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So these two things work together off the law. So oftentimes when we talk about what's happening in the court cases, and we've seen it even with our own HHS case, where people have said, oh, they should just have to do this. It's a woman's right. Well, that's not even related to what our case is about. We're not telling them they can't go somewhere else and get it. We're saying don't get it in our yard.
Yeah, any more than the person is saying, cake, I just don't want to put 2 men or 2 women on top of it, or I don't want to. I don't want to use my creative power as a photographer to photograph a gay wedding. It's like their freedom has to be taken away that I can have my freedom.
Exactly.
The other area we talked briefly about this the other day. Is the area of parental rights, and we don't realize how much, but there's a whole string of things going back decades with regard to contraception and abortion, and the way schools, in some places, not universally, but in some places, have been instrumental in providing or delivering those to minor children.
Yes.
There is now the whole thing which goes under the cover of trying to teach what do they call it? So you don't speak badly of gay children in school, and so and so.
Oh, anti-bullying.
And anti-bullying,
Yes.
but it really often turns into a promotion of the homosexual lifestyle, and there have been a number of these examples in the media just in recent days, and so on. And there are a lot of ways too with vaccinations and other things, both in the school system and even in states which basically are now requiring people to be vaccinated. Apart from the scientific questions, the question of the common good, the question of the effectiveness of vaccines, this idea is really certainly foreign to a Catholic ethos that you would force somebody to do something medically. It ought to be also contrary to an American ethos, shouldn't it? And indeed, I think it is.
Oh, it is. It is. Right at the heart of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is your right to own property. And inherent in that, the security in your... we talk about the Fourth Amendment, which is security in your papers and effects, which includes your person. It's been long cases of case law over whether or not the police could search your body, let alone put anything into it. But now we see in these other states, you don't even, if it doesn't matter if you believe in the Fifth Commandment and you want to have say so over foreign material being injected into your body. Now you aren't able to object at all. They're saying it's going to be mandatory. That's the law in California today. And they're trying to roll this out in other states as well, in Congress itself. And it's funny because here they're saying you don't have a right over what gets injected in your body. With the other hand, they're proclaimed with same-sex marriage as giving total liberty. So you could do whatever you want with your body. But on the other hand, they're saying, well, no, you can't because we want to put this stuff into it.
Yeah, the state on this point, the state wants to control what you put in your body.
Right.
But on these other areas, you can put whatever you want into your body, if you will, and that's perfectly fine. I think the other aspect of that, of course, too, is, we get back to the objectivity of this, Cindy, and get your thoughts on this. With parental rights in that, especially, we don't. The church is very, very strong on saying the right of the parents to educate and raise their children. And even in the law, the idea that you are acting in place of the parents. That doesn't mean you're substituting in a sense, but temporarily in particular circumstances that the parents agree to. This is getting almost to the point where, it's, I don't know what the Latin of it would be, that the parents get to act in substitution for the state's control of your children at night when you have to feed them and clothe them and change their diapers and things like that.
Right. Parents they're just taking control and telling the parents, well, you can do this and this and this, but these other things they'll control and they'll have a say in the children. Yeah, and this is just shocking, just absolutely shocking at what's going on throughout several states. It's not just, confined to California, but there are several instances where parents are just up in arms over what their children are being taught, what they're being told they have to do, and so on.
Well, there we are. We've sort of framed the question, and maybe when we come back we can take some callers and see what issues they're aware of and they want to talk about.
Exactly. We have Carol in Georgia. Hold on in there. And Bill in New Jersey on your call, 1-800-585-9396. Our numbers, 1-800-585-9396 here on EWTN Theology Roundtable.
On Saturday morning, don't miss the Catholic Business Hour with your host, Dick Lyles, focusing on careers and business with a Catholic perspective.
Hi, Dick Lyles here to let you know that our next program is fully dedicated to answering your calls about business, work, and career. Do you have problems with a boss or coworker? Maybe you'd like to grow your own business or start a new one. Give me a call and we'll talk about it.
The Catholic Business Hour, Saturday mornings at 11 a.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
A prayer for religious liberty.
O God, our Creator, from your provident hand we have received our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You have called us as your people and given us the right and the duty to worship you, the only true God, and your Son, Jesus Christ. Through the power and working of your Holy Spirit, you call us to live out our faith of the world, bringing the light and the saving truth of the gospel to every corner of society. We ask you to bless us in our vigilance for the gift of religious liberty. Give us the strength of mind and heart to readily defend our freedoms when they are threatened. Give us courage in making our voices heard on behalf of the rights of your church and the freedom of conscience of all people of faith. Grant, we pray, O Heavenly Father, a clear and united voice to all your sons and daughters gathered in your church in this decisive hour in the history of our nation, so that with every trial withstood and every danger overcome, for the sake of our children, our grandchildren, and all who come after us, this great land will always be one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Welcome back to EWTN Theology Roundtable on EWTN Radio and Television. Join our conversation with your question or comment. Free 1-800-585-9396. Outside the United States and Canada, call 1-205-271-2985 or send us an email etr@ewtn.com.
EWTN Theology Roundtable continues here on the EWTN Global Catholic Network on radio and television. This show will be aired on EWTN Television on Sunday, August 16th at 10 p.m. Eastern. Is going on live right now on EWTN Radio. We still have one line open. The number is 1-205-271-2985. We have our Vice President of Theology here with us hosting a show, Colin Donovan, with our panelist Cindy Cuellar and also John Manos, who is our EWTN General Counsel. And it's a joy to continue on this show with you talking about religious liberty and the recent federal court cases here in the United States. Carol is listening in Gainesville, Georgia on the EWTN app. Carol, what is your question for our panelists today?
Hi, we are starting an EWTN radio affiliate over here in Gainesville, and I would just like to hear some discussion on broadcast content in our current national situation.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I'd be the guy that would go to jail for saying it. John would be the guy who'd know the law and get me out. So what's going on in that area, John?
Carol, thanks be to God. That's a good thing you're starting an affiliate, and I don't blame you for at least wondering about the future of this. Now, as you've gotten a little more familiar, the FCC, we're in an interesting place. A few years back, there were people that looked for changes in the FCC law. They wanted something called localism, which would have more community expression and community involvement with the station owner as to what's in the public interest to be on air. So far, we haven't. We talked about earlier. I saw you, Ron, earlier. I hope you heard where we were talking about the court of public opinion. I think that's where we're going to see more of this trouble. Is that people are going to clamor that it's bullying language, or that it's tough, or that God's mean, or that people, that's your opinion, but everybody else wants this. And you're going to see more of the reaction come from, I hate to call it, weaponized public opinion. That, like we saw a CEO, where people are led to by the media to believe that this is wrong and it's harmful, and they turn God's truth, the way God ordered the universe, they turn that into something that you can see how the demons twist the truth that way. And that's where they animates a lot of this attack. Now, as far as trial courts go and content on the radio, we haven't seen anything yet where it's an explicit fight. There's a lot of things that will restrict content. For instance, a non-commercial station can't have commercial advertisements, etc. Those things talk about the content that can be on air, but I'm not aware of anything yet where somebody has, for instance, on religious channels, I don't know where anybody has challenged a religious station yet for speaking the truth in order to get them to be quiet. I wouldn't be surprised if we see it. I think it's going to come more from that court of public opinion, though. It's gonna be that kind of. I would think that's where the attack will start.
And the same-sex issue is likely to be the one, is it not? Because, this is an area where people can claim you are, those are your teachings and your beliefs, but keep them to themselves, because what you do is you're encouraging, like you say, you're bullying and discrimination, and yet that's restricting my rights.
Well, during the break, we were talking about how the law leads public opinion. And we saw it when Obamacare or PPACA came out. There were people in the news shortly thereafter that started to talk about people with too many kids cost too much money, and they should pay a surcharge because their insurance is more expensive. Now, they wanted that enabled as a federal law, as a tax laid on people. Or here's, we'll see, just like you said, same-sex marriage. We've seen already, even before the law was there, we've seen the public leading the charge to say people who disagree with this are wrong. And what they want to do, it's almost like they have their pitchforks out and they want to take them out.
What would be your advice to somebody who's trying to start a Catholic radio station in their area? What's your legal advice?
Call EWTN, become an EWTN affiliate, and we have all the ways to help people get started. I guess it starts with, like any other endeavor, and this on the Feast of St. Ignatius, always advise, before starting anything, pray to God for his assistance and that it would work. But I mean, all of those things, we have our radio staff here is great at helping make affiliates and start stations, and it's kind of complex to get into that. But so between prayer for God's blessing and the help of EWTN, I think that's where to go.
Amen. Some good advice.
Yeah, and then the other thing I was going to note is there's the upcoming radio conference that's going to be held. So that's something that our listening audience and viewers can check out as well.
That's right. That's coming up in October the 20th. It starts, I believe, and we have all the information available, EWTN.com/radio, with all the information about the upcoming Catholic, help you start out Catholic radio in your area, and also all the things that you have to know regarding specifically religious liberty and all the legal aspects. Colin?
Right, and just that's not like an open conference. It's for affiliates or people who want to become affiliates, and so the seminars and that are given are oriented towards such kinds of individuals. What's our next question in the line?
Our next question in line is Bill in Woodbridge, New Jersey, listening on Sirius XM 130. Bill, what is your question for our panelists today about religious liberty? Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I see the trend. I see the trend from a legal point of view. I think it's going to get tighter and tighter and tighter on Catholic institutions and Catholic people in the country. I mean, I would expect a flurry of lawsuits against every Catholic institution in the country over the next 18 to 24 months, trying to build on the same-sex marriage decision discrimination angle or another angle to really try to beat us out of the public square, using the law as a blunt instrument. My question is, the thing that's troubled me, I guess, first question, Mr. Manos, agree with my pessimistic view of the trend. My second question would be for Colin, and it would be, the church as an institution, of course, has many different apostolates and organizations and orders and dioceses, and they all seem to be responding differently, all the way from bishops who have said, we will exercise civil disobedience and run our institutions in accordance with Catholic belief, regardless of the consequences, be they civil or maybe someday even criminal. And then you have, for example, Fordham University, where the male head of the theology department just married his boyfriend.
And it's on the Feast of St. Ignatius, too.
And, thank you. And the general counsel, I believe it was, who issued the statement for Fordham, said, well, basically with the way the law is, we don't think we should terminate his employment. And so I guess the two-part question, one, where do you guys see the law going? And two, the church, I think, needs a unified response across its institutions. It can't just be the EWTN and a few dioceses and then everybody else kind of, I don't know, how, from a theological point of view, what should the church be doing in the face of almost a Tudor England kind of layering on of legal restrictions of Catholic activity?
Well, on that point, I'll get that one. You can answer the legal question. I think the Bishops' Conference has said, and certainly a number of bishops, that sure, we're going to fight these battles in the court, but it may actually come to civil disobedience. And that will be a hard step to take, because the church has always encouraged fidelity to the law of the land, or at least not doing something that is sinful, and clearly that. Civil disobedience will be obviously not doing the sinful thing, which we're obliged to do anyway. So if it's civil disobedience to an unjust law, we have a moral obligation not to obey that unjust law. Going beyond that, say not paying taxes, that would be a more complicated decision, because we have Jesus render under Caesar and so on. But we'd have to look at that, I think, with regard to the degrees of cooperation and so on. So I think circumstances may dictate that at some point. And we have the other issue, too, that each bishop is responsible for his diocese. The conference is not middle management, as John Paul II made clear in Apostolos Suis. And so, to get a unified front, you basically have to have all the bishops agreeing to do that, or Rome directing them to do that. I think in the context, Rome is unlikely to direct that, other than to quietly insist that they do the moral thing.
It's true. It's true. Mm-hmm. And I just like to one what appears to be an unequal response. You can blame the lawyers for that. Lawyers, we all have a different way of evaluating risk. And depending on the personality of the person we're advising, their risk aversion can change too. And the circumstances are so vastly different a lot of times that what makes sense in one place at that time might not make sense in another place at a different time. That doesn't mean that the truth changes. It just means that the prudence of the circumstance can change it. Now, back to
you can change the response, not the truth.
Sure, yeah. Sure. And I could make any number of Jesuit jokes, having gone to Jesuit schools, about why the very liberal response to the situation or a risk aversion might be there. But your question originally was, are you justified to have a pessimistic view? I think if your view was forward-looking and speculative 20 years ago, that was debatable. Here we are today, and so many things have changed, and there's a demonstration over and over again that the thinking and the rationale in our society has become unmoored from what God told us how the world works and how things work, that I think we're already there. I think the question is not, am I being pessimistic? The question is there still good legal remedies, and how much do I need to supplant those with just straight out prayer and fasting? Now, as a lawyer, I mean, I'm giving away a little bit of my pessimistic view at that point, that I'm advising legal remedies in prayer and fasting. However, I was very pleased. The EWTN was the first to take the battle up with the HHS mandate. We were the first one filing in, and we were right there with the fight right from the beginning. I think that the legal remedies need to be taken, because all manner of it, from prayer and fasting all the way to teaching the truth even in the courts, all of these things are at our disposal. God is asking us to take all of them into account. In this time, it's kind of challenging. In the Middle Ages, you could just be good and be a scribe in a nice monastery and kind of get along. Today, God's asking us to not only to be as good as monks with prayer and fasting, but to be good lawyers, to be on top of so many things.
That's true.
And to teach the truth in so many ways, that we have to look for his help in some of this. And it's but for the reasons I've said. We're already at the point where the things the courts are saying demonstrate they've already become unmoored from natural law and from the things that God has revealed about the Ten Commandments and the other things. We've
already crossed that bridge.
Yes.
And you're pointing to a very practical thing too with the prayer and fasting. And that is, in order to survive this time, if it should come to huge fines, prison, even martyrdom at some point, if not in our country, it's already going on around the world over religious freedom issues. You don't get to that gift of fortitude from zero. You build up to it by these kinds of sacrifices, by this kind of moral preparation.
Sure.
And so we need to do that. The other thought I have is Cindy can expound on this one. Being from Texas, you can always look to Cindy to say lovely things about Texas.
Go for it, girl.
But here's my point. We're not in this fight alone. There are a lot of Christians of other denominations and even non who recognize the foundational values of our republic based in the natural law, based ultimately in also divine revelation, since most of our founders, the peoples in any case, were Christians. And that is, it's great to see, like here in Alabama, the Attorney General of Alabama joining with EWTN in that lawsuit the time we won. But
yes.
we ended up, as it turned out, losing because they changed the rules and we filed again. And in Texas, there the governor and the Attorney General, they are taking up the fight. So we can't forget we have these worldly means too, the civil means. And I like the reason that our Attorney General here gave is he was defending the rights of Alabama citizens. And in fact, if there are Catholic governors out there and Catholic attorney generals who are on the other side of this fight, I think you need to think about, you have an obligation to defend the natural law rights of your Catholic citizens, of your Christian citizens, of your non-Christian citizens. And those natural rights are all the same for everybody. Anyway,
Amen.
What's going on in Texas with that?
Well, they've got all kinds of things that are going on. With the Governor Abbott coming to the defense of some of these folks that are dealing with the HHS mandate, but also you've got some that are being attacked because they don't want to go to the Supreme Court ruling. Their religious beliefs are being challenged, and they're being told you'll have to toe the line here, and the governor is acting on this. You also have the whole thing with abortion. You have the state of Texas that stood up and said no, the 20-week ban. They've gone and taken that, and they've actually had a court that sided with them on that whole issue. So
at the federal level.
At the federal level.
Yeah,
so Texas is leading the charge, and as Colin said, if you've got Catholic governors, attorney generals, and so on, you need to go on and defend your people, the citizens in your state, because you're obliged to do this.
That's your duty. Your duty is not to build up the federal government and the power of the federal government, but to help the rights of your own citizens, to build up their lives, to build up their families according to their values, not the values of bureaucrats or the values of seculars who are telling you good is evil and evil is good.
It's true. And as much as I look even in the states, we have to remember the same-sex marriage decision from the Supreme Court is similar to what happened with no-fault divorce. When we were talking about in some ways we've already crossed a lot of this. This was done through states recognizing what other states have done. So some states started to do the wrong thing, and it polluted the whole system through people getting mail-order divorces. And the question, where were the Catholic lawyers in that? And you look at the discussion through all that, and here we are again today. Now it's more extreme. Now Catholic lawyers have to be. Now people have to see, no, there is such a stark contrast. The contrast is being drawn out. That's where the area comes.
Yeah, just the what I meant with Texas with the courts was you had these clerks that did not want to issue these marriage
We had one here in
licenses.
Alabama too,
That's right.
Pike County.
They didn't want to issue it, and the governor defended them and said they will not be forced to do it. Now that's not happening in other states. In other states, for instance, Kentucky, the governor tried to force this clerk to issue a marital license to a homosexual couple, and the clerk couldn't do it and said, I will not do it. So that's going on.
You know, there are the legal dangers to be sure, but the danger of our society consists also in this. It's sort of the same thing of the court of public opinion, is basically the net effect of all of this will be to scour the country free from Christian, Orthodox Jewish, even Orthodox Muslim, or even Orthodox, atheists who believe in the natural law, or at least live according to what their reason tells them is the right way, because such people won't be able to hold government jobs and eventually won't get the experience to run for office, or so this is a very insidious thing, which, as you noted, starts but then builds and rolls on to its evil consequence.
We have Tom listening in Ohio, driving through the state of Ohio on FM 89.7 is how Tom is listening. Be very safe as you ask for us, Tom. Go right ahead.
Hey, I just wondering, you guys are talking about conscience rights and all of that. I was wondering with Counselor Manos what you think may be on the legal landscape in the coming years regarding how violations or defense of conscience rights might take place, and also with regard to the church, whether there may be, because the church is holding fast in various ways, whether we'll try to see the church increasingly frozen out or marginalized in terms of cooperating with the government, or maybe even getting tax-exempt status jeopardized. It looks like we're going to win with regard to the HHS mandate, but it seems like there's other battles that are brewing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it'd be hard to speculate where these things would, it would be open speculation. We could look at kind of some of the tea leaves that we've already discussed. And that's what the court of public opinion, their job, being pressured into their job with, on a legal front. And we see it with the HHS. If you take HHS and compare it to these clerks and what the clerks are being, well, this is legally valid. You should issue this marriage license. And the clerk's saying, no, I don't believe this is a marriage. I can't do this. How does that play out in a legal front? At some point, depending on whether the governor supports them or the public doesn't or other things, that clerk will probably be replaced with somebody who will. Solzhenitsyn made this observation of the Marxist state. He said Russia had become a point where lying was a way of life. It looks like there's differences between the Soviet state there and how things are here. It looks like this is exactly what we're saying. Swallowing your beliefs is going to become a way of life here. That's what is pushing us. And what that means practically is the person who's removed because they refuse to give a I've already seen that. That's a fight that happens.
Washington State has made this law forcing pharmacists to violate their conscience to issue contraceptives. In this particular case, it's the day after.
Exactly.
In quotes.
So that's what I'm saying. Since we're already kind of there, we just apply it in these other new areas that are being introduced into society. Those are the kinds of legal challenges we're going to see, where somebody who says the truth is no longer allowed to exist, either in the job, by being allowed to speak in public, and the law challenges are going to come on the back end of that. What happens in those situations where these things happen? Was somebody fired? Was a state clerk fired because they refused to give a marriage license? Because they between a man and a woman, that's where the litigation will come. That's kind of where I see these things happening.
I think there's also that there's a difference in the opinion of those who are guiding this process between me refusing to put two men or two women on a wedding cake, and you refusing to put a Bible verse against sodomy on a cake. That's lawful. What I want to do is unlawful. And this has already been acted out. I think it was in Colorado. In Colorado, where on one hand, the one person was charged and affirmed with a fine, and on the other hand, it was okay that they would be offended by this Bible verse. And I think that's another way of marginalizing it. In fact, I would presume that is a patently unconstitutional way of applying the law unequally.
It is, and that's a source of. You identify it correctly. When you get into constitutional law and issues, there's several things you need. One is good lawyers. One is the resources so those good lawyers can do what they need to do. Where EWTN's been helped with the help of Beckett Fund. But people, and I say this all the time, it's just a general, it comes back from Kurt Llewellyn and his observation of the law. And I say it often to people, even when you are winning, even when you're on the right side, litigation is hell. It's an emotional drain. It's difficult for most people to deal with it, even when they're right. Because they have to listen to somebody else say they're wrong. They have to listen to somebody else insinuate. They sow doubt in an individual. It's a different kind of martyrdom than what everybody thought we were going to get, which was the Marxist state or the fascist Nazi state. This is the people. They don't come in a black suit or a stormtrooper with a gun. They come at you serving papers, or you lose your job. And then to get back to the point where you think life is normal, you have to fight uphill through a process that's foreign to most people. Litigation is not something most people are used to. It's very emotionally draining, and it's a different fight. It's a different fight here than it has been in others. And most people want to shy away from that. And that's where the pressure against religious liberty comes in.
To just, as you said, bury it and suppress it and just try to get by and stay out of people's view and out of trouble. And
try to get along, exactly.
Get by to get along.
Real quick, we have Mark in Cincinnati. We only have about a minute and a half, Mark, but what is your question? Go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing I don't understand, after the Hobby Lobby ruling, I would have thought the Little Sisters of the Poor would have had no problem because they are a religious, order. What did the federal courts see in Hobby Lobby that they did not see in Little Sisters of the Poor, or maybe even EWTN eventually?
Mark, thanks for your call. I'm another Cincinnati boy myself. I went to St. X in Cincinnati. Quickly, because the minute's coming up, the major differences come down to technicalities between a difference of their type of insurance. Hobby Lobby was self-insured, which meant they were paying even the underwriting of the insurance. The Little Sisters of the Poor have an independent health insurance thing. This leads to logical fallacies employed in the court that they think the Little Sisters are not engaged in providing the things because some other company is. Now, we can get into that in a bit. That's the short shrift of the difference.
Well, what a great topic to talk about. I bet we're going to do this again sometime in the future, time going forward. And so thanks, John, for coming on board.
Thanks be to God.
For being with us today.
Thanks to everybody for also tuning in. EWTN Theology Roundtable continues next month. Stay tuned to EWTN. God bless you.